Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to just do a really brief refresher over props. I've heard some people talking about the fact that they have trouble telling when to use like this dot state, when to use this dot props. What the heck is the difference between this dot props and just using props, right? Can be a little confusing, and some of that will come with time. What I'm going to do today is I'll just run through some of the differences between classes and functional components and when to use the different things that I've mentioned. So the first thing we're going to start with, I'm actually going to not have cap lock on and say component, and I'm going to convert this over to a class because I think that will give the best example for us. And keep in mind, this is a blank, just brand new Create React app from Code Sandbox. I'm not doing anything special. I created it the second before we started recording. So I'm going to go ahead and place all of this in here and save. Okay, so it's all running, React's happy. What we're going to do to start out, so we're actually going to, and I'm copying this over from what I have so far, and again, like I said before we started recording, the file that I've copied this from, I'll paste in the channel for you all to look at. But here I've got state. Okay, and on state, I have a first name, Nate, and I have favorite things, some things that I like. I like JavaScript, love music, love chocolate. I like all of these things, love them all. So what we're also going to do is we are going to create a couple of components. I will make a components folder, and I'm going to make two files in here. I'm going to call one, to make it super obvious, class component.js, and another one, functional, I can spell, component.js. So I'm going to copy over my code for both of those, just for time's sake. And these notes will be in the file when I paste it in the channel. But just to make it look clean, I'm going to leave that there. And then I'm going to also copy over for the class component some code and delete these comments. Okay. So now the last thing we need to do before I walk through all of this for you is I'm just going to take some more code here, paste that there, and we need to, of course, import both of those components up above here. All right, so if you're like, whoa, Nathan, what the heck, what's going on? Don't worry, I just needed to do some setup. Now we're going to walk through what's going on here. So we have a class, right, up here, class app. Then two child components. One's a class component, and I literally named it that to make it obvious, and another one, functional component. And I'm passing down props. So I have first name, look at that, it even highlights it for us, up here in state, right? I've got my state object because that's literally what state is, right? It's an object, see with these curly brackets, and inside of here I have two key value pairs. The first one, first name, has a value of a string, Nate. The second one, favorite things, has the value of an array, and I have some items in there. So for the class component, I'm passing down first name, and I'm saying this dot state dot first name equals first name here. That's what I'm saying. And for functional component, I'm saying favorite things equals this dot state dot favorite things. So the first thing I want to talk about is when to use this dot state. So in React, as you remember from going over vanilla JavaScript classes, in classes, we use the this keyword to reference things, right? Like methods, we use it to reference lots of different stuff inside of the class. Well, here, we're using the this keyword and state to reference this object right here. The only time you use this dot state is when you're referencing data inside of the same component that you're referencing it. And I'll get, if that sounded slightly confusing, don't worry. I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. But here, this dot state is referencing state that's here inside of the component. Now, something that I've heard, like I said before, was people being confused about props. What is props? What does it do? Well, let's head down to the next level, class component. Let's look at this first component right here, class component. We're going to go in here and take a look at what we have. So, okay, we have another class, obviously. We have some more state. Don't get distracted by this. In fact, we'll just delete this. I just put that there so you could see, oh, like it's super obvious. That's a life cycle method, right? There was no code in it, but this is a class, okay? Just the same as any other class that you might have written at this point. I have some more state here, and from up above here in my class app, I've passed in first name equals this dot state dot first name. And remember, this dot state here is specifically referencing the state object in app. But when we pass in first name, what's going on there? Okay, well, React, you know how people talk about how React makes development easier, that it's a library, it helps you program and create applications and websites faster. Well, part of that is something like this. What's happening is React actually knows that when you define first name here as being this dot state, which is this object up here, this dot state, and first name inside of there, React knows when you're passing in first name on props, it's going to take that and it's going to bundle it up into an object that is passed in to this component. So down here in the class component, which is this component right here, when we want to reference first name from this parent component up here, down on this level, we need to say this dot props. So notice this time we're not saying state. That's because we're trying to access something that's coming in to, like, think of app, this thing right here, being up above a level up here, right? And then there's this right here. So there's two levels, and inside this level, the child component, in order to get at what we've passed in on first name here, we have to access it with this dot props. So what is props at this point? Well, I kind of already talked about it a little bit, but in your mind, and this is what helps me, picture props like this. Const props equals first name equals Nathan. See that? Props, picture it like a variable that you might write, right? Because we've defined first name as being this up here. First name equals Nate. Well, okay, I put Nathan, so let's change it back to Nate. So picture props being this, okay? So you have props coming in. It's an object right here, just like this. And when you want to reference it inside of your class, you have to use the this keyword. This dot props dot first name. So we're using dot notation just the same as if we were to access this, right? If you were to access first name on this variable right here, if this was all by itself and you just wrote this in VS Code without any of this other Code Sandbox React stuff, you'd probably say, oh, if I want to get at that key value pair, I'd say props.firstname. You're using dot notation to access in props the first name value that's been passed down from up on high here, up here in this parent. So knowing that now, knowing that that's pretty much what we're doing, all we're doing that's different from what I showed you down there is that instead of just saying props.firstname to access that component, sorry, that object, we're having to use the this keyword. Now here's where it gets interesting, and hopefully this will kind of clarify for you what's going on. Remember how I said when you're trying to access state that's from the same class, you're grabbing it from? Like right here we said this dot state to define first name when we're passing down props. Down in our child component here, I wrote this so, and by the way, this is what it's rendering to the screen. Nate Thomas, okay? Nate is what we're passing down. Remember, we passed that down from right here, state first name, we passed in props, defined it as first name, passed in this.state.first name. Down here, like I just explained, props is coming in, it's an object, and we access it using this keyword, this.props.first name. But now here locally to this class component, we have another state object. And in this state object, we have a last name. But we don't access this by saying this.props.lastname because this state is local to this class component. Even though for the first name that I pass down, we have to say this.props.firstname. In order to access my last name here, I'm going to say this.state. So this right here, these are two differences, right? We have this.props and this.state. And the reason that we're having to use one here for first name and the other one here for last name is because first name is coming down from the parent component on props, the props object. Whereas this.state, the last name, we're having to pull that from the local state here inside of this class component. So, okay, so let's recap before we go over to a functional component because I want to make sure we do that. Props is an object that you access the values of inside of it using dot notation. React knows and just does this for you. It creates props based on whatever you're passing down from the parent component. You use the this keyword to access props and state whenever you're inside of class components. And here we used this.props.firstname because first name is coming in from up here in app. And we use this.state.lastname to access the last name because it's local state here. The last thing I want to talk about is functional components. So functional components, at this point, hopefully your brain's not fried from talking about class components and stuff like that. But in functional components, let's go ahead and call this up. If you notice in my index, we've imported a functional component. We are passing in props again, right? Just like we did with the class component. It's no different. Except this one, I've decided to call it favorite things. Didn't have to call it that. Didn't have to call it the same thing. You can rename. We're not going to get into that right now, so that's confusing. Don't worry about it. I called it the same thing on purpose. But we have favorite things. And again, just like before, because I'm pulling in local state from this class component, I say this.state. I used state instead of props because I'm referencing this state object inside the class. So I'm going to pass in this.state.favorite things. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling in this array. That's what's getting passed down on props. So it's being put by React into a props object with a key of favorite things and a value of this, which is what this.state.favorite things defines. So let's hop down to the functional components section and take a look here. We have const functional component equals props. Okay, so here it's even clearer than the syntax in the class component. Here we have props coming in right here. You know, a lot of times with like arrow functions, you use like empty brackets, or like you might say functional component, and then those brackets, right? The parentheses. Well, the equivalent for this would be putting props right there. Many of you know that. That's review for probably most of you. But what's important to notice here, and this is the big difference between class components and functional components, is that with functional components, remember over here in the class, when we wanted to reference props, we had to say this.props to get at that props object. Well, over here in functional components, we don't have to use the this keyword because we're in a functional component. We still have to say props that we're passing in here, but we don't need to use the this keyword. So all we need to say in a functional component is props dot. So props is still an object, just like in a class, and we're still referencing it using dot notation to get at favorite things, but we don't need to use the this keyword. And then we go ahead and we map over this. We pass into map for each thing. We have an arrow function here, and for each thing, we're just returning a p tag. And I defined some light styles here just so you could tell the difference. This is in the class, this is in the functional component, and it's mapping over my favorite things. Just one more time to recap. Functional components do not use the this keyword. Classes do. Obviously, you probably remember that from classes in vanilla JavaScript, but here in React, when you're wanting to access props, the difference between accessing props in classes and accessing props in functional components is that in classes, you have to use the this.props, the this keyword. In functional components, when you pass in props, you can just say props.whatever you need. Those are the two big differences between functional components and class components with props. Remember that props is an object, React creates it, and up here, remember that we specifically use this.state to access state, but down here in the class component, we have a difference of this.props and this.state because we're accessing first name from what's coming down from the parent and this.state to access local storage. Not local storage. That's a real thing that's different than this. Local state. Okay, so I see a couple questions. How does props get the data to begin with? That is a great question, Danny. So that kind of gets back to what I was saying about how, you know how I said React really makes development speedy? React knows up here, remember this is the parent component, picture this as like up here, and then the functional component class components I made, those are two things, right? It's like two lines extending down. That's what it's doing right here. And when I pass in first name and I pass in favorite things, this is just one of those things that React knows to do. React does this for you. It creates an object. And in that object, which you can access later on the next level down as props, it creates that and it assigns the key as this, and it assigns the value as whatever you put inside of here. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? That's just, that's just one of the things that React abstracts away, right? React makes that easier for you so you don't have to do the work in that instance. You label whatever you want here, and then inside class component, you know that it's just going to be coming down on props, and you can access it since this is a class using the this keyword. So I hope that helps some of you. If not, go ahead. Yeah, totally. I mean, so you're probably very much like me, where I like to know the why behind why is this the way that it is. And this is one of those things that React does for you. You can look under the hood. You can look at the node modules, maybe probably not now because it'll just be confusing, but someday if you want, once you've been through more of the curriculum, you feel like you're stronger in JavaScript, you can go poke around under the hood in React and see the actual code where it's doing that. But for now, don't worry about that. Just know that React does that for you. It creates props, and it puts in whatever you define up here. You can put whatever you want. You can say, ha equals banana. And the next level down, if I want to access that, let's just do this. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's go down to class. And right here, I'm going to console.log this.props.haha. And let's check it out. Banana. See that? Look at that. So it knows, React knows because it creates it for you, that whatever key and whatever value you give it, this is going to be put into an object that you can reference the next level down. And that's props. That's the difference between classes and functions and stuff like that. Some of you, I think, very much like Danny, were confused just because how does this work? Well, React does it for you. It's one of the really nice things about React. All you need to do is just keep track of your naming, because sometimes you'll be the next level down and you'll be like, why is this not working? And maybe you put an extra H. See, it just popped up as undefined because there is no such thing as haha with an H at the end in props. Up here, this is what it's called. So that's the only key value pair inside of that props object that comes down. So that's the main thing you need to watch out for. All right, we are 5 minutes over. I don't see any other questions in the question thread. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end this recording. I will upload this to YouTube. I will post that in the question thread. I said earlier it would be on the Q&A post, but I'll post it in the question thread. And I have a fully commented, like it's literally this code but with comments on it about everything we've just spoken about. I'm going to paste that in as well right now, and then the video later when it finishes uploading. If you have any more questions, I'll watch this question thread for a few more minutes and hopefully answer any questions you have. Thanks, everyone. Let's see here.